So I recently finished this cute low poly Christmas critter scene, and I thought I'd make an artwork breakdown video showing you how I created the artwork. And if you'd like to purchase the finished artwork project files, you can get that with the links in the description on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. Now, I originally created this artwork as an example scene for the product page of my low poly asset pack, which is a huge pack that I've just released. So this pack comes with 1000 low poly models, and they're all pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with rendered thumbnails and sorted catalogs. So if you're interested in checking it out, the links will be in the description, and there's also a free demo on my Gumroad store which comes with 30 assets if you want to check that out. And Christmas of 2025 is almost here, so I thought it would be fun to create another Christmas themed artwork. So to start off, I just opened up a new scene in Blender and I added a plane, and I made the plane really long. Then in edit mode, I subdivided it so that it has lots of geometry. Then I turned on proportional editing and I just selected some of the faces and just moved some of the faces around a little bit so it looks just a little bit more random. Now, to make it look like it was very slightly bumpy here for the snow, what I did is added a modifier, and I added the displace modifier. Then you can click on the new button to add a new texture, and then if you click on this button here, it'll go to the texturing tab. Then I can change the image or movie to clouds instead, and then I can turn the scale way down so it's very detailed. Then back over here on the modifiers panel, I can just turn the strength down to make it very subtle. That's basically what I did to just make it look a little bit bumpy. Now, as I mentioned, this project was to demonstrate my low poly asset pack. So here's my low poly asset pack. So it comes with all these catalogs like animals. It also comes with like bathroom, different beach assets, and characters. So what I did is I just went to all, and then I went to the search here and I searched for snow, and you can see I have these fir trees with snow. So if I just add like a plane, so I have something to drop them on, you can see I can just drag and drop them from the asset library into Blender and just stick them on a plane. So I just added all of these assets into the scene. So they're basically just some simple fir trees or pine trees with a bit of snow on top. Then I needed to add them into their own collection so I could scatter them on the ground surface. So to do this, you just want to select all of them. So select all the trees, you'll hit M. Then you can click on new collection here, and you can just type in like tree and then click on create, and it's going to add them into a new collection called tree. So then I just selected the ground plane, which I created for the scene, and I added the new modifier, which is in Blender version 5.0 called scatter on surface. So the scatter on surface is a really useful modifier for just scattering other objects on a surface of an object. And the scatter on surface modifier is actually powered by geometry nodes. I'm just going to add a geometry nodes workspace. You can see if I zoom out here, you can see it is powered by geometry nodes, but it's basically going to use the very most simple setup where you have the distribute points on faces and then the instance on points. So I don't even need to use the geometry nodes here. I can just go back to the layout because the scatter on surface has so many settings. And to make the entire collection of trees show up, you can go down here to the instancing. You can change this from object to collection and then choose your trees collection. And then you can click on the pick instance button. So you can see as I turn up the density here, it's going to randomly distribute more and more trees. So I turn this up to like a 700. Then you can go down here to the transform settings and you can like turn on the randomize, and you can randomize the rotation. So I could randomize the rotation z-axis, turn this up to a really big number so it randomly rotates the trees around. And if the trees are just going too far into the snow, I could also change this surface offset to move them up and down. But for the final scene, I wanted to have a Christmas tree in the very center of the scene. So what I did is went into weight paint mode, and you can see I just weight painted where I wanted the trees to be. So wherever it's red, that's where the trees are going to be. And then where it's blue, there's going to be a bit of a clearing in the forest. So then what you can do is you can take the distribution mask and you can click on the input attribute toggle. And then here you can just choose the point group float. And so now you can see I can just paint where I want the trees to show up. I can also change the seed around if I don't like how they are, so I can just randomize that seed. Now, another thing I did to the ground to make it look a bit more stylized and make it look a bit more low poly is I added this decimate modifier. So you can see the decimate modifier is going to start to get rid of more and more of the mesh, but it's going to try to retain the mesh's shape. And so by doing this, you can see now the little bits of snow here, they're more of like random shapes. So there's some bits which are like triangles, there's some bits which are more square, and some parts are bigger and smaller. You can see with the decimate turned off, it kind of just looks like a grid shape, and that doesn't really give that nice stylized low poly effect. So by turning on the decimate, it just made it look a bit more low poly and kind of randomized the face size. So then I wanted to add a Christmas tree in the center of the scene. So if I just go to my assets tab here or open up the asset browser, what I can actually do is just click over here on the holiday section, and you can see I have some different holiday assets, so I can quickly place them into my scene. So I just went here into kind of the center, and then I dragged in like this Christmas tree. Now this Christmas tree I actually originally created like 4 or 5 years years ago. It was one of my older Christmas tutorials on creating a low poly Christmas tree. If you want to check out that tutorial, I'll have the link to it in the video description. But I actually wanted to go back and kind of improve the model because I don't like how the original model looked. So one thing that I didn't really like about the original Christmas tree tutorial is that it has all these little tiny dots for the Christmas lights, and then also the circular Christmas ornaments were all the same color, and I think it looks a lot more interesting if all the colors are different. So I basically just took that asset that I created years ago and I improved it by making the different Christmas ornaments be different colors. I also made a few Christmas ornaments which kind of fell on the ground here, and then I deleted all those tiny little Christmas light objects and I added some new ones which were more stylized. So you can see I just modeled some very basic Christmas lights. I gave them all different colors and then just placed them around the Christmas tree, and I definitely think this looks a lot more stylized and more interesting. And then because I have my low poly asset pack installed as an asset library into Blender, I can also drag and drop in like the Christmas ornaments, and I can just place them around the scene, and I can also add like these presents here, and I can scale the presents down and just place them around. I can also give the presents like a random rotation and a random scale if I want to. So here's what the scene was looking like with all the presents kind of randomly placed around. Now I also want to talk about these presents right here because I thought it was a little bit boring that all the presents were just random colors. I wanted to add a little bit more interest to some of the presents. So I created this texture procedurally where we have kind of this candy cane stripes. So if I jump over to the shading tab, I'm just going to show you this material. So for this, I basically added a wave texture and I turned the bands direction to diagonal, and then I also used the object coordinates. So then what I did is put that through a color ramp and I made it very contrasted. So we kind of have that cool look where it looks like wrapping paper, kind of candy cane wrapping paper, and then put that into the principled shader. Now it kind of doesn't look very good from like this view right here. So if you want it to look good from all angles, then what you might want to do is like use the UV coordinates and UV unwrap it. But I was able to just kind of rotate it so the camera can mainly just see it from the front perspective. So it adds more visual interest to the scene just by adding some presents which have the kind of the candy cane wrapping. And so I added one here on the front and one here on the back. So then I also wanted to add a camera to the scene to kind of finalize where the camera is actually going to be looking at the scene. So I'll just jump into the camera view. So what I wanted to do is kind of get that low poly stylized effect where everything looks really flat and squashed. So to do that, if I just select the camera, what I'm going to do is go to the object data properties of the camera and I can turn the perspective to orthographic. And so this way, if I kind of zoom way down here, you can see that the trees which are really far away and the trees which are closer up to the camera, they actually have the same size. And that's because of the orthographic perspective. And so that gives this really nice stylized low poly look where everything is really kind of squished and there isn't really much perspective. And then you can see if I try to zoom in and out, I can't actually zoom in and out, and that's because of the orthographic type. So to change that, you'll have to change the orthographic scale. So you can just drag the orthographic scale to zoom in and out. Now, I also created a few other renders, so these renders here, and for those renders, I actually didn't want to use the orthographic type because I didn't want some of these trees to get in the way, and I also wanted to show a little bit more perspective. So for that, I changed the type back to the perspective mode, and then I kind of zoomed in here closer to the Christmas tree, but then to get that effect just a little bit, but not have it too strong, I just turned up the focal length. So you can turn up to maybe like 100 or 200 or something, and I just kind of placed the camera right about here. So this way there is a little bit of perspective, but it's not quite as strong. So it is kind of in between the perspective and orthographic. So I then wanted to add some animals to the forest to make it look like some little critters in the forest are kind of coming over to the tree. They're kind of taking a look at the tree and kind of all standing around. So to do that, I went back to this little assets tab, which I have, and I went back to my low poly asset pack. And what I can do is just go to the animals section. So here's the animals section. Now some animals, which I think look really good in like a winter kind of Christmas snow scene, is these cardinals. So I think red cardinals especially look really good. So here's a red cardinal, which I have in my low poly pack. And I just love cardinals with snow. I think like the bright red feathers on top of the snow just look so nice. There's also a female cardinal, which is kind of this like brown one. So I just added a few of these into the scene. And then I also have like this Arctic wolf, so I think this is really cool for adding into the scene. Then I also have some bears, so I actually have like a polar bear. So here's the polar bear, so I can add like this polar bear, kind of scale it down, rotate it, and I just stuck it back here kind of in the back of the scene. Then I also have a polar bear cub, so I thought it would be fun to have like a mama polar bear and then like a baby polar bear. Now for the animals, I didn't want all of them to be at their very basic default pose. I wanted some of them to be maybe sitting or have more of a relaxed pose. So what I did is went into edit mode and I just selected the faces for the back legs. So then what I can do is just place the 3D cursor right here, and then I can change the transform pivot point to the 3D cursor. And then what I can also do is turn on proportional editing. So now if I hit R to rotate and then scroll the size of the proportional editing, I can kind of do some basic rigging. So it's definitely not as good as adding bones and doing a proper rigging setup, but you can see I can just kind of rotate this, and then I can also just like go into wireframe and I can deselect the top of the legs, and then I can just click here to center the 3D cursor, and then when I rotate this, it's going to rotate the back legs. So I just posed the polar bear so that the polar bear was just sitting on the ground, and it just makes the polar bear look more relaxed in the scene. So if I kind of zoom in here, go into the camera view, you can see now the polar bear is just sitting. I think that's pretty cute. And then I also added these bunnies here, so a few different colored bunny rabbits from the low poly asset pack. And I also added like a blue jay, and then the cardinals, also another bird here. This is maybe like a sparrow, and then another gray bunny. So now let's jump into the lighting, and I want the lighting to look very moody and kind of cozy and make it sort of look like it's dusk. So what I did is use the very basic sky texture, which is in the world, but in Blender version 5.0, there's a new type called multiple scattering, which looks way nicer. So the old version of Blender was using the single scattering. It just doesn't really look that nice. It doesn't look quite as realistic, and I don't like the colors as much. But with the new type in Blender version 5, if you set it to multiple scattering, it looks a lot nicer. I really like how the colors look. I think it looks a lot more realistic. And then what you can also do is change the sun elevation to make it look like evening. And I just really like the lighting and the colors. It just looks really nice. So here's what the scene is looking like now. So because it's dusk, everything looks pretty blue, but you can see just on the sides here, some of the trees, it looks a little bit bright. So the sun is just going down. And then of course we have the lights there from the Christmas tree. Now I really wanted to brighten up the scene and make the Christmas tree feel really warm and kind of make all the critters look like they're being drawn from the forest, from the cold forest into the very center of the scene here, into the clearing. So to do that, I just added this light here. So this light is just a point light, and I made the color a very warm light, and I turned up the power. So before adding this light, you can see everything looks pretty gray and dark. Your eyes don't really know what to look at. The only thing which is really bright in the scene are the little light bulbs here. But then after adding this light, you can see it looks a lot more interesting. The Christmas tree is really lit up, and everything in the very center of the scene is really lit up, but then kind of back in the forest, it looks darker. And it almost feels like the Christmas tree, like the entire Christmas tree is actually emitting light. So all the critters in the forest are kind of coming together and taking a look at the tree. And then also to really bring your eyes into the center, I added this depth of field here, and I added this empty object. And then if you select the camera and go to the object data properties, I set the focus on the empty. So what I like to do when I'm adding a depth of field is I first turn it down really small. So you can see it's just focusing on the empty here. So if I move the empty around, it's just going to focus on everything which has the same depth as that empty. But then what you can do is you can turn up the f-stop. So I just turn it up more and more. You could have like a really strong depth of field if you want to, especially for like the stylized low poly look. But I turned it up actually pretty high to I think like a 12 or something, because I did want all of the animals to still be in focus. So you can see now like the polar bear is in focus and the Arctic wolf is in focus, but then like right over here, these trees are a little bit blurred, and then these other trees here in the background are a little bit blurred. So it just helps to bring your eyes into the center of the scene. And then as far as the view transform goes, AGX is the default view transform in Blender, although it used to be Filmic, so I used Filmic for a long time because it was default in Blender for a while. And personally, I usually like using Filmic better for most scenes. So you can see here's AGX, and it makes the colors, which are really bright, kind of blown out and a little bit too strong. You could of course adjust that by like making the lights a bit less bright, but then the compositing effects aren't going to be quite as strong, so the glare isn't going to be quite as strong. So you can see here's the difference between Filmic and AGX. I usually like using Filmic better, so it does make those Christmas lights kind of a bit brighter, but it's not quite as strong. And then for the view transform, I changed this to very high contrast. If I set it to none, everything just looks a bit too gray. So if I change this to very high contrast, it just pops out the colors, makes things a little bit more saturated and dark. So now let's jump over to the compositing. So I first started by adding a glare set to bloom, and so that looks really nice. It really makes the Christmas lights glowing, so that looks way nicer. And then what's really cool about Blender version 5 is there are some compositing presets. So I added this toon image. So you can see here it is without the toon image, and here it is with the toon image. So I just turned up the clarity a little bit, the detail a little bit, and the sharpen just a little bit. So you can see here's what it looks like before and after. So it just kind of pops out the image and makes it look stronger and makes the edges a little bit sharp. And then there's also a cool vignette effect. So this vignette is a new feature in Blender version 5. So there's this really nice factor value which I can drag. So if I turn this down, it's going to be less strong, or I can make it stronger. And then there's also this feather here, which is going to be kind of like the blending there at the edges. So here it is before and after with the vignette. So the vignette just really brings your eyes into the center of the scene. It also makes the Christmas tree look a bit brighter, and then it makes the forest around look a bit darker. Now the final thing which I did to really make the scene pop and to really make it look nice was I did some final color correction with the RGB curves. So you can see here it is before and after, and this adds a really nice mood to the scene and also makes it feel like it has a certain temperature. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to have the entire forest look really blue because this is a winter scene kind of in the forest in the middle of winter. So I wanted it to actually feel very cold, but right now it really doesn't feel that cold. But if I make everything a very strong blue color, then the forest is going to feel much more cold. But then the very center, I wanted to look really warm, kind of give like a campfire feel. So all the critters are coming out of the forest and kind of warming up by the campfire. Now in the center of the scene, there isn't a campfire, there's just a Christmas tree, but I wanted to give kind of that campfire feel and make it feel very warm, kind of like all the critters are coming together outside of the forest and coming into this clearing with a warm campfire. So to do this, you can see if I click on the C for color, I added just a very small curve here to make everything a bit more contrasted. Then here for the red, I just drag this down very slightly to kind of turn down the red, and then I just left the green how it is. But then here for the B for blue, I just turn this up a little bit, just to add a little bit more of that cold blue colors. But then earlier in the video, I talked about how I added this light right here. So this is just a point light, and I turned the color to kind of this nice warm orangey color. And so that gives that really nice kind of warm color in the center where the Christmas tree is. So you can see if I just kind of change this color, I could make it like a strong red color. That looks a bit too red, so it doesn't really look natural. But if I make it like a blue color, everything looks really cold. So I feel like if I were to walk up to that Christmas tree, it would just feel very cold. It wouldn't have any warmth to it, but I wanted to make it look very nice and warm. So you can kind of walk up to the Christmas tree and it just has a nice cozy feel. So I just made it kind of like this orangey red color. So you can see before and after adding that nice orangey red color, it looks really nice. And then to see the final compositing in the 3D viewport, you can go into the rendered mode and then click on the drop down arrow and change the compositor to always to see the final compositing effect. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope this video maybe gave you some inspiration for maybe creating your own low poly artworks or Christmas themed artworks. And if you'd like to purchase the finished artwork project files to go into the Blender file and see how I created everything, or to even use the low poly models as assets in your projects, then you can purchase it with the links in the video description. And you can also check out my low poly asset pack, which comes with 1000 low poly 3D models, and they're all pre-set up in Blender's asset browser with rendered thumbnails and sorted catalogs. And finally, you can also check out my Christmas and holiday tutorial playlist if you'd like to learn how to create Christmas and holiday artworks like a Christmas wreath or a Christmas tree or Christmas lights, and my other Christmas themed tutorials. So definitely check out my Christmas and holiday tutorial playlist with the link in the video description. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and Merry Christmas.